of a number of different organizations where this has come from, as well as a lot of history behind it. And so I think you'll find it somewhat interesting because this is in healthcare, this is becoming a very critical thing. And so, hopefully you'll have, if you have questions, we'll have time to address them. Just imagine going to a hospital and having one with no errors committed at anything, having a focused vision of excellence, having a place where everyone, including staff and patients, are treated equally, and where when you're told you're going to be discharged, it's completed in an hour or less from bed to door. Okay. An organization that uses trial and error learning to change for the better. Okay. Especially after you have accidents, incidents, or near misses. And it has a strategy of redundancy in behaviors, such as one person stepping in when a task needs completion. And I know those of you in manufacturing say, well, gee, we do that all the time. But in healthcare, it's different. So we tend not to always have as much flexibility. Imagine not having to worry about inventory being available and having all equipment working perfectly and having time to actually catch your breath and relax. Coworkers that look out for you and having complete trust in your teammates no matter what you're doing. In a workplace where you have the freedom to say what you want with no repercussions. It's a learning organization that learns from their mistakes because everybody wants the same thing. And it's an organization where people are evaluated on how they work, not who they know. Okay. And focus on their strategic plans, and it values the staff. And most importantly, safety is number one for both patients and staff. That's the kind of workplace that's seen as a high reliability organization. And some of you may say, well, gee, that's what we have. And when I worked in chemical and process industries, I saw that. It was. But other industries are not always the same. And so therefore, you have to think about it. So I'm going to talk about some definitions and build off of that. The first definition I want to talk about is the smallest one, and that's performance excellence. And that's creating effective and efficient processes that deliver consistent output with minimal variation and waste. And I think probably most of the people on this webinar probably would agree, yeah, we do that. Okay, and we're striving to do that, and that's fantastic because that's your foundation. From there, you branch out to operational excellence, and that's where you're building in things like culture, people, resources, and systems, how they work together. Okay, so it's all built in there, and a lot of times that's what we call high reliability organization. But we also have the outer band, which is really, really important. And that's looking at overall results consistently and for now and in the future. And a lot of times that's known as business excellence, but some people may know that as Baldrige. Okay, the thing is, they all link together. They build upon each other. You need to have the performance excellence first. You build the operational excellence, and then you work towards business excellence. It doesn't happen the other way. You've got to start with the smallest and build out. Starting with performance excellence, you're creating a culture of excellence with a consistent focus on process improvement. And the key there is process improvement because you all know everything's a process. And so we have to build on that. Okay. We have to have a common approach. And some people you like using DMAIC, some people like using PDSA. As long as it's a common approach and people are using it, that's fine. You've got to have that common approach. And then you've got to expand your improvements to the broad system, not just unit wise or, I'll say organization or not organization, but we'll say division wide. When I was at Eastman Kodak, for example, there were certain divisions were always seen as excellent. Other divisions weren't. But you wanted to get everybody up to the same level of performance. So you have to try to expand that across the board. Once you do that, then you can start evolving to the business excellence because then everybody's working towards the same thing and everybody's seeing it going that way. When we start looking at how system wide looks, how an organization is, if you're just reacting to problem, it's kind of really haphazard and sometimes you hit them and sometimes you don't. As you start building systematic approaches, now you start to get a little bit more of alignment towards those strategic and operational goals. As you align the approaches, then they all start moving in the same direction. But until you get to the integrated approaches, you really don't get the whole organization moving as a whole towards there. And that's the challenge we have because we have to have the leadership, the strategy, the operations, the workforce, all working together as an integrated approach to really drive results, which gets you to where you want to be. So let's talk about HROs and where they came from. Now, basically, there was a study done in the mid 80s about organizations working in hazardous systems and did it error free. And they came on a concept known as normal accident, which says, sometimes things occur in highly complex systems because it just does. And we try to minimize those. And they looked at a number of things to build off of that, such as nuclear plant operations, aircraft carriers. If you ever have a chance to see one, if you've never been on one, they're amazing uh, things to see. Is a piece of equipment and the way everybody has to work when you have aircraft operations going on. Chemical manufacturing is another one. How do they make them and how do they do it? But we also have things like air traffic control. We got a lot of planes in the air. How do we make sure they don't hit each other? So all these things are important to us. Think about it. The Navy has sailed ships with nuclear power plants for over 60 years without any accidents. Okay. And, when you think about the nuclear operators on the ships, they have extensive training before serving on ships and aircraft carriers. And the age of most of them are between 19 and 25. So it's not like these are people that have been doing it for 25 or 30 years. These are young people. And when they get out, because of their nuclear training background, they have their pick of jobs because of their training. Okay. It's important to recognize how things work together. And so, some of the elements that they found, and I'm going to go into detail in a couple of them, but hyper complexity, extreme variety of components, systems, and levels, everything working together. And if something's off, accidents happen. Okay, or chemical manufacturing. Some of the places I worked at, Eastman Kodak, it was one of those things where, common parts in chemical manufacturing had blowout walls. Why? Because accidents happen and things explode. That energy builds up and you just have to take care of it. You have tight coupling, and that's the reciprocal interdependence across many units and levels. So things are working together and really intertwined. And I'll explain in a little more detail. Extreme hierarchical differentiation. You have multiple levels of things, and each has its own set of regulating mechanisms that you have to work through. And you have large numbers of decision makers and communication networks that you have to have a lot of redundancy built in because you got to make decisions quick and you got to have good communications to make it happen. And you also have to have what? Extreme accountability. because a substandard performance or deviations from the standard can cause severe consequences. And then a high frequency of immediate feedback about decisions. Man, you could know right away. You need answers fast. You don't get it by not moving quickly. And you have compressed time factors. Things are measured in seconds. And more than one critical outcome must happen simultaneously. And it just the complexity of operations, you have to do it. You have to be able, because once you start, you can't say, whoops, I just got to stop and do it and look back. No, you can't do that. Okay. Many organizations display some of the characteristics. HROs display them all the time simultaneously. Hyperconic complexity. Aircraft carrier is the most common example that everybody can relate to because you have constant production measures, constantly changing conditions, and you have that hierarchical structure. So you have multiple things going on, and aircraft land and take off very short time frames. And they do it at all types of weather conditions, all types of uh, times. Very short turnaround time is expected. All personnel are expected to prioritize safety and have the authority and responsibility to say, whoa, time out, you got to stop. Somebody's going to get hurt. So that you have a safe operation going on. Tight coupling. This is very noticeable in healthcare. Okay. When you have somebody comes in and from an accident, you have trauma doctors, nurses, anesthesiologists, and labs all working together. They're focused on what? Saving that person. They trust everybody that's in the room explicitly. There's no question. They know what the skills are, they know what needs to be done, and everyone knows what their job is. And so people consistently prioritize safety and have the authority and responsibility to make real time adjustments. So it's very critical. Healthcare has been slow to adopt high reliability because it was developed where? In manufacturing and other things than healthcare. So they didn't recognize it. But if you think about it, the human body is one of the amazing examples of a complex system that works. You have chemical processes going on, you have, I'll say, physical processes going on. Okay. You have hydraulic processes going on, heart pumping blood, it's hydraulics. Okay. So the principles of high reliability go beyond what is traditionally known in industry and start looking about how you do that with a person. Okay. And it cultivates resilience by being relentless and prioritizing safety over everything. And that's key is safety first, no matter what. Some of the issues, though, that healthcare has is they have high turnover and less intact teams than most other industries because people tend to go and they go to other places. They go here, they go there. And so it makes training more critical, which also adds to expense. Okay. And it also drives the importance of standardization of equipment and processes, as well as some fundamental principles we know as mistake proofing, so that you can't hook up the wrong hose to a certain machine. Okay. Certain machines go only certain ways. All right. And the focus is on the care of patients. And, we don't necessarily know what their background is. We don't know much of their behavior. It changes. Everybody's different. Some people are runners. Some people are in excellent physical condition. Others aren't. And so you have a high degree of uncertainty and unpredictability. And if you're a trauma surgeon, you can get called in anytime, day or night, to do an operation at a very short notice. So you have to constantly be ready to react and do. When we talk about high reliabilities, we start talking about systems thinking because We've got to be aware that safety is something that's not static, it's emergent. It happens, you got to react quickly and do it. And then it may go be quiet again for a while, and all of a sudden it happens again. Okay. And, we have to look also that there's no two accidents are the same, they're different. So, because they're different, it's going to react, it causes us to have to react differently and do things differently. Okay. First responders, 100% respect for them because they have to constantly react to things. High reliability organizations work to create an environment where potential problems are anticipated, detected early, and virtually always responded to prevent catastrophic consequences. So, what are the elements of HROs? Basically, there's three things. One is a safe culture. That's a culture where blame is not pursued, but rather accountability is. The second all is change management because we're looking to create change. We have a constantly changing environment. People have to be comfortable with that and build off of them. And then you have Lean Six Sigma as your problem solving. And it's simply because you want to look, when you fix something, you want to make sure it's fixed. It's not going to come back in 6 months. It's not going to come back in 3 months. You have to make sure it's fixed and it's working. And so Lean Six Sigma becomes very popular. When we talk about HROs, there are 5 fundamental characteristics to them. One is sensitivity to operations. You have to be keenly aware that whatever you do, how does it affect what the operations of the organization are? How does it affect how things work? You also have to have a reluctance to simplify. Too often, people simplify and make it and forget about the complexity. Okay. I always laugh when some of the doctor shows they say, "Oh, we can't do Lean Six Sigma. We can't do that because you're dumbing down the process. You're simplifying it." No, we're trying to make processes consistent, but we're not saying anything about simplification. We're talking about making them so that they're repeatable. And you can't simplify a lot of your systems. You can't simplify your processes, but you are preoccupied with failure. If something fails, what did you learn from it? What are you doing? How do you prevent that from happening? Okay. And you have a difference in expertise. It's very noticeable how in some organizations expertise isn't always appreciated. But with an HRO, if you're an expert in something, you're appreciated for being that expert. And that's a key element because people tend to forget that. And the other thing, and the last thing that I find is very critical is you have to be resilient. HROs are under constant pressure, constant change going on, and keenly being aware. You've got to be resilient to changes and make sure that you can react to them and do things with it. So let's talk a little bit about some of these in more detail. Sensitivity operations, changing needs, changing things going on. So you have to know. You have to have the front line is your first defense. So therefore, your front line has to be well trained. They have to be able to trust each other. They have to be able to work as a team. And they have to have the resources to do their mission, no matter what it is. And think about it. That's key. Okay. You work hard not to have silos. And this can get hard sometimes because, it's all I do in many organizations. Some people say, okay, well, that's a senior engineer. We got to treat them with a certain amount of deference. No, there's no silos. Everybody is treated equally because you have to work together. You've got to be able to speak up. The other thing is that if you have a near miss and say, wow, we avoided that one, that's not a success. That means something happened, the process failed. We need to fix that process so that we don't have a near miss because there's going to be times we may miss it. And then you have to look at small wins. The challenge we have is everybody wants to have these big, overwhelming system approaches and system projects. System projects take a long time. Work from small incremental steps, kind of like what PDSA looks at, and build off of that and work to make things better. You want to do the right thing, not the fast thing. And that's a lot that has to do with the reluctance to simplify. It is not just because we can do it quick. I want to make sure it's right, it's done right. And we want to make sure that we don't oversimplify the systems for failure. We want to basically look very closely. Root cause analysis that is done on patient issues that come up in the hospital are very serious and people take them very seriously. We do FMEAs, we do 5 Ys, we do a lot of things to really understand why the failure occurred and how to keep it from happening again. Okay. Now, sometimes we end up with the closest fit approach because we can't get everything done perfectly. But we don't want to have misdiagnosis. We don't want to have delayed cares. We want to have everything looked at. Okay. The example given here says, okay, somebody's got looked at it and said, oh, you got an upset stomach, and so therefore we've got to give you some medication for it. When rather they might have appendicitis. Okay, so we don't want to oversimplify. And we want to be skeptical and account for all findings, okay, because we want to prevent errors. And as much as possible, always look at the big picture. The human body interacts with everything. And so, one of the things that I've learned in working here the last few years is it is amazing we as individuals are how our bodies react and how as a system it works to keep us going. Want to have the preoccupation with failure. Focused always on safety and risk. I want to minimize risk, focus on safety. Not going to do anything too risky. I'm not going to ignore any failures because they can make things worse. Okay. And that means any kind of failure, whether it is a technical failure with equipment, some process failure, or people failures. We do make errors. Some things happen. You have to have a way. How do you minimize that? How do you make it better? Okay. You want your staff encouraged to think of ways that the work processes how they can be broken down. Okay. We utilize FMEAs all the time. And it's simply because it helps us understand the failure modes. In some cases, we've used fault tree analysis the same way. Okay, we need to understand that. And then every day, we have what we call huddles, meetings every morning that take no more than 10 minutes to identify potential risks or potential failures. Oh, this piece of equipment isn't working. We contacted engineering. We need to get them up. If they don't come by a certain time, we need to call them again to get them up here. You want to have people, you have those meetings, they happen every day. And they happen at shift change, they happen every morning. You're going to collect data over time, whether it's a big elaborate dashboard or a simple board that you're looking at, you keep track of by doing it to look for trends. You're looking for things that could cause a failure. Defer to expertise and the fact that you're acknowledging others' knowledge and experience. What are others doing? I have an advantage in the hospitals in the fact that most physicians know me as, when they first are introduced to me, they introduce me as Dr. Bossert. My boss is a trauma surgeon, so when he does that, he's doing that because he wants the other doctors not to look at me as non-clinical, but rather as a doctor. Yeah, I'm not a clinical doctor. A scalpel is the dangerous thing in my hand. Okay. But I still have knowledge and expertise, and I can use that to help them make their processes better. Okay. Leaders in the organization need to know at all levels who's been trained in stuff, who's good at it, who isn't. And the challenge we have there is that a lot of times leaders don't know. They depend on people closer, the frontline supervisors to know. Well, they do, but you have to look at that. But the value thing is, you've got to value expertise for authority. I don't care if that person is the unit manager, if the expertise of this person is going to save another's life. I want to look at what that person can provide. And that's an important aspect. You also have to be able to adapt to circumstances that change all the time. Think about it. Who was the first to run into a problem? Or, has this been studied before? And where are the experts? Who solved it before? Who figured out how to do it? Think about all the changes that we have seen, even in the last 20 years with respect to technology. And I'm just talking healthcare. We're talking all kinds of technology. Think about how did they do that? How did they figure it out? And those are things that we need to look for and understand that expertise. But we also want to cultivate diversity. I don't want everybody thinking like me. My God, that would be a horrible thing. I want people to challenge who basically are trying to find a better way. Because I don't know everything. And I think of most of, we have our own spheres of influence that we have. But other people have other ideas and other perspectives. We need to look at that. And then you've got to practice resilience. Okay, the ability to shake it off and keep moving forward no matter what. We see that in sports. We've seen it in the last few years in healthcare with COVID. Okay, we're going to see other things, but the thing is, we got to be able to identify, control, and recover from errors. Okay, and then build the strategies we need to react to things when they change, and emphasize the importance of working in teams. Excuse me, because teams are going to help us move forward. We need to focus on removing barriers that inhibit collaboration between functions, between units, between groups. Okay. And embrace uncertainty and complexity because let's face it, it's not getting simpler outside. It's getting more complex. So if it's getting more complex, how do we embrace it? How do we find a solution without compromising what we know? In practice, worst case scenarios, we do that all the time. We're always practicing. We're trying to get better. I see surgeons do it all the time. They have skill centers where they go, where they can practice some of their skills to keep up on it. Okay. Interesting point. Trauma surgeon who I have a tremendous amount of respect for. The other day, he was actually in the area. He was learning how to use a certain new type of robotic machine for surgeries simply because he hadn't used it before. It was new and he wanted to do it so he'd be able to use it in surgeries to again be able to be more precise and more uh, get practice with it. So, you'll learn how to do this stuff and keep going. The neat thing with HROs is there's a wonderful alignment with other initiatives, and I'm talking here primarily in healthcare. Pathway to Excellence is one of the healthcare initiatives that is focused on nursing. Okay, and it focuses to create a positive environment. And it is areas of leadership, safety, quality, shared decision making, well being, and professional development. So it takes all aspects that a person needs to be a great nurse and gives them the opportunity to do it. If I look at that and combine that with HRO, okay, I have the HRO elements on the top, the 5 things I talked about. I have the other elements on the side, and what you see how well it fits. Okay. Magnet is kind of think of pathways on steroids. So what it is, it's moving up to a greater, more complex situation. You're focused on nursing excellence and patient outcomes with data. Okay. So you're looking at empirical outcomes. How well do they do? Do you have transformational leadership? And by this, they mean leadership that looks beyond this is my job and looks at where do we need to go? How do we need to expand? How do we get better? You have structural empowerment, which basically says, okay, you're the head nurse, you're the unit manager, but you're empowered to manage that as well as you can. You do everything you need to do. And the only time you actually have to ask permission is usually if it includes a budget item where you've got to expend over a certain amount of dollars. Okay. And you're focusing on professional practice. So, how do you set the example for all the people that work for you? And you go out and look for new innovations, new improvements, different ways of doing things so you can expand and build on your knowledge base. Again, this matrix just kind of shows how that fits, and it's pretty consistent. And then finally, you have Baldrige, and I suspect a lot of you have heard Baldrige. Maybe some of you have been Baldrige examiners, and you've had a chance to do it. The thing is, Baldrige has been around, started off from manufacturing and service, and now has gone into education, health, and work care and nonprofits. And again, it looks at the organization from the leadership to operations and focuses on what? The results. Okay. So you have leadership, strategy, customers, workforce, measurement, and operations. And all that is validated by the results that you see. And again, similar type approach in terms of the alignment. So, how does it all tie together? Every one of these approaches, no matter which one you do, you have to complete an application. You have an approval process. So if somebody's going to go through, they're going to review the application against the standard criteria and see how well you do. Depending on how well you do, you might get what they call a site visit, where somebody's going to come in and examiners are going to evaluate how well you do. And then you're going to get a feedback report. The feedback report is going to say, okay, you met the criteria, so therefore you got it, but here are areas you need to improve on. And you build off of that. The thing that we always have to remember is that when we're talking about implementing a change, we need to take into account culture. One of the things you always have to do is always remember anything you do, if it goes against the culture, you're going to lose. Culture always wins. So you have to focus on how do you change that culture when you're talking about a dramatic change in an organization. And the organization I'm working with, this is basically a presentation I gave to our senior leadership. They needed to build a just culture for changes to succeed. They had to focus more on not doctors or nurses being subservient to doctors. No, they have an equal voice. You have to look for accountability. You have to look for things. And that's one of the things that we can do. So, a simple maturity model. And the maturity model I like to use basically 4 steps. First one is saying you have an awareness. Second one is initiation. You starting the effort. Integration is the third, and then you have the actualization. So as it is that with any maturity model, you're talking a dynamic system. And so when we're talking about doing this, when you get a critical mass in each categories, you start moving into the next phase. And if we talk true culture change, you go through these 4 steps to build it. You're going to talk somewhere between 5 and 7 years in most organizations, because I'd love to say organizations are simple and straightforward and everybody just smooths and says, yeah, there, goes off and do the things we want to do, but they don't. So how do we get them to basically meet the needs that we want to be and do what we're supposed to do? So we're going to talk about the 4 steps. As we go through, we're going to talk about what are the foundational elements. So the first is executive leadership. What's the vision? How do you drive the organization change? You have to have strategic planning. You got to take that vision and set your direction and have some objectives and track it. You're going to use metrics and dashboards to have accountability so you can see how you're doing. You got to have process improvement because you got to do things better, right? We have to know that. So process improvement is critical, but you also have to know process management. I'd love to say all processes get fixed at the same time. We can't do that. We don't have the resources most of the time. So we have to prioritize which processes do we focus on. But at the same time, over a 5 year period, you want to manage your process so you have them all done and you have them reviewed and you have it going. And you're going to have a portfolio that you're going to say, we need to work on certain things and build off of that. Okay. We also going to have infrastructure and governance. How do you track? How do you succeed? How do you make sure we don't get diverted by other things? Okay. Then you're going to train people. You're going to train them in terms of what skills are needed. How do they build off of that? How do you keep going and sustain things over a long period of time? And constant communication. I learned about constant communication at GE. Every month we had a senior leadership meeting with Jack Welch. Jack always emphasized 5 things. He always talked about 5 things. He cared less about the others, only 5 things. You knew as long as one of your items that you were working on was in those 5 things, it was still important. If it wasn't, you had to find out what you needed to do to align to the 5 things. So you need to have that constant communication and think about our organizations. It gets difficult. Some organizations are all in one area, but some are scattered all over the place. How do you communicate? How do you get that information and keep it going? So when we start talking about it, the lowest level is awareness. And when we talk about awareness, we're talking about leadership trying to see, do we want to do this? Is this something that's important to us? So what do we have to do? What if we're ready to do it? Then let's go. But let's look, do you have a matrix of what the criteria is? Do you have something to manage all that and make it go? If you're not ready, what do you need to do to get ready? Okay. And part of that comes with defining what does an HRO look like. So define that vision and get that leadership commitment. And then start talking about what that overview is and how does it affect the different levels. What are you going to have? What's in it for me? Are you looking at zero harm? Are you looking at a safe culture? Is the workforce going to be empowered? The thing is, you want to know that. You want to build off of that. Second phase, the initiation, you're saying, okay, we're going to do this. So now, what do we have to do? Well, we got to build some strategic initiatives. We got to understand what we're going to do. And we have to do kind of a gap assessment. Where do we need it most? Where are the areas that need the most work versus the ones that are going on pretty good and we just work on them later? See what needs to be worked on, who's going to be involved, where's it going to be, do we have the right staff, and can we define what improvement initiatives might help us get there faster, or things we can do. We need to look at different system-wide processes. So maybe we need to have some initial training, say like in white belt in PDSA. What is this thing called Six Sigma? What is this thing called DMAIC? What's problem solving? And then you build yellow belt and green belt. And then you might have some change management training. You might have some black belt training. You might, see what you got to do. And you're going to utilize your performance excellence team or your strategy team, depending on who they are, for your strategy to planning, for developing your content, and for delivery and mentoring. Okay, those are the things you got to look at. As we get to the integration, now we're talking about putting things and tying it together. I may have a bunch of different groups doing it, but now I have to show how it's tied. So I have to get the leadership commitment. I have to show how they are utilizing just culture and change management, how they're deploying process improvement tools. What are the things they're doing to follow the strategic plan, to meet the objectives that we've set up? And you want to measure process. Too often we measure process, as most of you are probably fully aware, are with lagging indicators. So can we identify some leading indicators? Are there some things we can look at? Do you have data governance put in place? Do you have a standard process improvement approach that you're going to use? Okay. How do you get data? What are the things you're going to have to do for improvements? Do you track your return on investments for stuff you have? And do you have the right software to track and sort that? Whether you're looking at um, key process initiatives, return on investment scorecards, capabilities. Can you do that? Can you do it using software, or do you have to do it by hand? You all know as well as I do. When you have to do it by hand, it takes a lot longer. So, what can we do to speed this up? What can we do to communicate this? And how do we communicate this across the organization? That's key. Because when we get to the actualization, when we get it where the group is running, they're going to have processes look like. We have system-wide process improvement governance. We have people knowing what's going on, who's doing what initiatives have been done. When I have something like this, I can go and say, gee, we had this problem last year in this organization. It sounds like the same thing. Let's take what they did and see if we can put it in there and put it in place. So when we look at our key process initiatives, we have some, or key process indicators, whatever you want to call them. It helps us understand where we're at. We have an outside assessment of our maturity. So we have that looked at. And some people do this through Baldrige. Some people do it through a local state award as opposed to the national award. Regardless, you're going to have somebody look at it from the outside lens because you're going to get biased. When you're working on an initiative and been doing it 4 or 5 years, you're biased. You need to have somebody look at it with a clear vision. And so you need to have an outside assessment done. The nice thing is that, most state quality awards are in line with Baldrige and they don't cost as much. So therefore you can have them come in, look at it and evaluate your processes and get a good perspective on it. You want to have some type of ongoing education and process improvement across the whole system. Now, in healthcare, what they do, for example, is every year you have a certain amount of educational things you have to do every year. And it's to stay aware of what's going on, what changes are. And usually it comes down in January, and you have usually 3 months to complete all of them. Usually there's like 20 or 30 things you have to do complete. And you usually have to score over 80% to get credit for it. So you've got these educational things. That helps. It helps keep people fresh. Those are things you also have to look at. But then you also have to link in, are you really saving? Are you doing it? So what's your return on investment? What kind of value are we getting? I don't want to start a project or I don't want to purchase new equipment unless I know it's going to help me be better. And then I do have a return on investment. So that's an important aspect also to think about. Okay. Here's some references. If you want to look at some more on there. Yeah, I did kind of put my own in there from the Journal of Quality and Participation that you can get through ASQ. If you haven't read it or not, it's a good thing to look for. Guess what? It almost sounds like this presentation, but it gives you a sense. But there are other elements in here. And with that, Jenny, I'm gonna open it up for questions if you've got any.
There were a few. When you're talking about starting this journey, do you start at the corporate level or like at each hospital setting for like a multi-facility organization?
Okay. You have to do some of it at the corporate level. Only because you've got to get people involved. You got to get leadership engaged. That to me is one of the starts. You can't do this without leadership. Uh, if you try to work from the ground level up, it's not a 5 to 7 years. You're talking probably 10 to 15 years because leadership's got to be engaged. If you don't get them engaged, you're not going to get very far. So yes, leadership is very important.
There was a comment that process quality can be quite cumbersome in high reliability organizations, and it seems like it can be nearly impossible to get everything on track without being um, reductionistic.
Okay, I agree to a point, and I think that's why you have to look and say, what processes do we start with? And we're not necessarily trying to reduce or simplify. What we're trying to do is standardize. And so we get people doing the same process for the same things. But at the same time, I'm not going to, I might eliminate some processes, but I'm not going to eliminate them all. That would be, I've never seen it happen. I have seen where you do have to manage it. And that's where I think process management becomes very critical, especially in terms of trying to figure out where you're going with it, because there's so many ways you can go.
Um, you mentioned Jack Welch and that there were 5 things that he was talking about. Could you tell us what the 5 things were that he were emphasizing?
Honestly, I don't remember them all. All I knew is because I was heading up a Lean Six Sigma program for my division. That, quite frankly, I knew if he stopped mentioning Six Sigma, that I needed to figure out what the next best thing was because that was no longer his priority. But usually, he always emphasized ROI in addition to Six Sigma. He wanted to have a good return on investment. And, that's comes with the way his management style, and that's the way it was. Um, I'd love to be able to say that it was wonderful working there at times, and it was. But I came to GE from a very high tech company that was making mobile phones at the time. And when I went to GE, I felt like I stepped back in technology because it wasn't the cutting edge stuff. It was just the next level back. So I felt I stepped back in years. But everybody had the equipment, they knew what to do. So they were making it work efficiently. So, best managed ROI did not always equate to latest and greatest. So, but those were two. He always emphasized ROI, and while I was there, he was always emphasizing Six Sigma. I don't remember what the other three were.
There was a question about whether the financial calculation needed to be done at the maturity level or if it could start earlier.
I like to start as early as possible, but I will tell you that most of your finance people will say, "You don't need me yet. You're too soon in the process." But I'm a firm believer. The sooner you get them on board, the better it is. I've had successes with backroom operations, sometimes with the customer facing, because the savings are bigger. One of the backroom operations I worked on a number of years ago saved over $1.2 million. It was hard dollars. In other words, it was dollars that the organization was losing until we stopped this process or until we fixed this process. And once we fixed it, now it was income coming in they didn't have before. So, and that was backroom, strictly backroom. And that's what you got to look at. The backroom to me, when I did it, people say when we started Six Sigma at Bank of America, they said, why? It's a manufacturing thing. Why don't you do it? Because you need to improve all processes no matter what, not just manufacturing operations, and it works.
Does does having a certification body come in and doing auditing, does that prevent creativity when you're looking at risk avoidance in healthcare?
Uh, Certification bodies like the Joint Commission or CMS or some of the others, um, it's a mindset that it's a hard one to get through because people look at a lot of the certification bodies and say, well, they're coming in every 3 years. So they say, okay, I got to do it. But once they leave, they say, okay, now I don't have to do anything for another 3 years. Trying to get the continuous improvement mindset. And you're starting to see some of that change now in healthcare, where people are starting to look at that through BMD and some other organizations, because they're treating it more like an ISO 9000, where they're coming in every year. And by doing that, it gets more of a continuous improvement atmosphere. So I think it's helping. It's still growing. Um, and that's a hard part with healthcare, is because you've got so many regulatory bodies that are coming in all the time, whether it's for the clinical operations, whether it's for pharmaceutical operations, whether it is for lab operations. They've got all kinds of different certifying bodies. It seems like somebody's always there. So you have to meet those requirements. And that's one of the things that when you start looking at going to an HRO, what are the regulatory bodies you need to address? What are the requirements? And where can you kind of get some mutual beneficial things going on, because they all basically are asking for the same thing? And if that makes it easier. Okay.
Do you ever do calculations for things like cost avoidance?
Yeah. We do. We have cost avoidance now, and that comes under soft dollars, and counting does not like it. But the team that I work on, we have some people that have got a lot of experience working in with accounting people, so they have what I call good business minds and are able to talk to them about it. The thing is with cost avoidance is I usually try to twist it to cost avoidance prevented this accident, but it also allowed us to do this more. We're able to see 5 more patients a week or 5 more patients a day. And so I try to put it into something that's beneficial, the organization will see as beneficial. Because if you say cost avoidance to any accountant, they're kind of like, I don't want to hear it. So you want to try to twist it so it makes good financial sense for them.
Great. I think we've covered the majority of the questions. That was a really awesome presentation. Thank you so much. I think we're going to end here now. Do you have any final comments you want to make, Jim?
Can say is give it a try, and if it doesn't work, talk to people. You know, contact people, find out who's doing it, and ask questions, because that's how we learn. We're all going to learn from each other. I didn't learn this by just reading books. I didn't learn this by doing it. I learned it by doing it. I learned it by talking to people and taking best practices and expanding them.
Great.
Pretty much it.
Thanks so much. Thanks everybody for joining us, and you'll get an email from me in a couple days with your with some links and with your RUs for watching the webinar. So thanks for joining us today, and we hope to see you again in a future webinar. And thanks to our presenter, Jim. Thanks so much. Goodbye.
Thanks, Jenny.